white privilege exists.
Absolutely.
It does.
Absolutely.
And where's the proof of that?
All around. I tell people often now, in hindsight, one of the things that I wish I would have been more cognizant of was the white privilege at UCLA that was sitting, right next to me. For Black people, I believe white privilege is something to leverage.
What is it, though? I don't see it anywhere. What is it?
Huh?
What is it?
How don't you
For
not
people
see
like
white
me who
privilege?
don't see it.
How do you not? How do you not see white privilege?
Because it doesn't exist. That's
Yes,
what
it does.
So what is it exactly?
I believe white privilege is just the ability just to be free and white and not have the same type of social, economic, and social ills as Black people have to deal with. I mean, there's no white racial profiling. White people don't get pulled over by the cops just because they're white. They have the ability to, show emotion and love to their sons without being emasculated. There's all kind of examples
That's
of white
amazing
privilege.
if you believe
Absolutely.
that.
Why don't you Black? How come you don't believe white privilege exists? What you see?
Well, because I am Black in color, but I don't have that dark mentality that most Black people have.
Clearly.
I see, she said clearly, I see that white people have the same struggles and things that we have in that
What type of
they have
struggles
to
do they
make their
have?
marriages work. They have to make their children, help their kids grow up in the right way so that they can earn a living and be independent.
But they also have the majority of their
make
fathers
kids,
at home.
Right,
We don't
and
have...
the reason for that, it's starting to change somewhat now, but the reason for that is because they are taking responsibility for that, whereas Black men and women are not taking responsibility for that, as they did prior to the Civil Rights Movement. Black people are blaming it on their lack of self-control and self-containment. They're blaming it on white people, while white people are working hard to keep it going.
I do believe that there is a need for Black people to be held more accountable.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that doesn't excuse racism, that doesn't excuse institutionalized racism, that doesn't excuse...
But there's no such thing as that.
Yes,
it's an illusion made up by Black people and their leaders.
No, it's not. It exists.
Well,
Sorry.
where's the proof of it, though?
What do you mean, where's the proof of it?
There are many kids who are getting into, Black kids who are allowed to get into these universities around the country, right, based on affirmative action. And because of affirmative action based on their color. That's discrimination based on color, and that's wrong. Does racism exist?
I believe racism does exist.
And where's the proof of that?
You just see it all over in the country, with proof of it. In terms
What
of just
what do I see?
Disproportionate in the economics with Black people.
But that has nothing to do with racism.
It does. Racism is about power. It's about who is in control. And Black people can't be racist because we're not in control. We're not in control of the educational system, some of the social organizations and things that run this country. We're not in control. Racism is about power.
But you would be in control of your own life if you had good parents, if they taught you how to be independent, if they taught you how to build, how to take care of. I've noticed that the reason I left where I lived over there in the Crenshaw district is that once the white people left, because once I moved there, when I first moved there, it was mostly whites. But once they left, as they did in Gary, Indiana, and other places, the Blacks turned it into a ghetto. A beautiful area went to hell in a handbasket, so I got out. But if Blacks had more character and they were taking care of themselves and being responsible and buying land and teaching their children,
that has to be taught.
Then right, so that has nothing to do with racism.
But that has to, of course, that has to be taught.
So it's not racism. It's not white people's fault that you're not teaching your children to do that.
They're polluting our kids on college campuses by teaching them about white privilege. So what they're polluting the minds of young people, both Black and white young people, that somehow that if you have higher income, your kids go to better schools and they achieve more, that is some kind of privilege. I think that they should change it. They ought to get rid of the concept of white privilege and just call it achievement. Today, there's a 75% illegitimacy rate among Black people. And so a lot of professors and leftists will say, oh, well, this is a legacy of slavery, to break down the Black family. But in 1938, the illegitimacy rate among Black people was 11%. In 1960, only 22% of Black kids lived in a single female-headed household. Today, over 70%. then also the poverty rate among blacks is 37%. However, blacks that can be characterized as married and working, the poverty rate is only 8%, and it's been that way for several decades. And the poverty rate among blacks who have two people working, mother and father working in the family, the poverty rate is 5%. And so you pick up the huge poverty rate in female-headed households, and that applies to whites as well. That is, female-headed white households are poorer than intact households. And so there are only four things that you have to do to avoid living in poverty, and it's not rocket science. That is, 1, graduate from high school. 2, don't have children before you get married. 3, take any kind of job. And 4, stay out of the criminal justice system. And if you do those things, you will not wind up poor.
Cops are more willing to shoot if the perpetrator is black
What's your data
than white.
What's your basis for saying that? Last year...
Well, look, I know a lot of people would say, look what's going on in Chicago.
I know what they would say.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what the facts are. 965 people were shot by cops last year and killed. 4% of them were white cops shooting unarmed blacks. In Chicago in 2011, 21 people were shot and killed by cops. In 2015, there were 7. In Chicago, which is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic, 70% of the homicides are black on black. About 40 per month, almost 500 per year last year in Chicago, and 75% of them are unsolved. Where is the Black Lives Matter on that? Half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year there were 14,000 homicides, not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
So there's where you would say that this is purely because of social justice. This is purely because they want ultimately for people to be angry enough to just keep voting Democrat.
That's right. And where's the evidence of the lack of social justice? When a black suspect is killed by a cop, believe me, the media is on it. People are watching it. He was selling Lucy's and resisted arrest, whether it's Tamir Rice in Cleveland, who was twirling around the gun, whether it's Michael Brown in Ferguson, who had just committed a strong-arm robbery. Almost every one of these incidents involves somebody resisting arrest. Why don't you just do what the police tell you? My dad said, when I get pulled over, have my hand at 10 o'clock, have my hand at 2 o'clock. 1890, 1900, you look at census reports. A black kid, believe it or not, was slightly more likely to be born to a nuclear intact family than a white kid. We launched this so-called war on poverty in the 60s, where literally Lyndon Johnson sent people knocking on doors. I lived in the 60s, and people knocked on doors apprising women of their availability to welfare, provided there was no man in the house. And we went from 25% of blacks being born outside of wedlock in 65 to 75% right now. And you look at how much money that we spent on welfare, and the lines are parallel. It was a neutron bomb dropped on this country, not just on the black community, but on people in general. And I could quote the Brookings Institution, which is a liberal think tank, and the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, and they'll both tell you that there's a relationship between crime and bad schools and going to prison and not having a dad. So this is not just a liberal kind of thing or a conservative kind of thing. It's a real world kind of thing, and they don't want to have that conversation. Desire not to have this conversation for fear that it then will cause you to rethink your assumptions. A psychologist would call that cognitive dissonance. This anxiety that you feel when you have had your assumptions challenged and you don't want to do it. It's uncomfortable. The #1 cause of preventable death for young white men is car accidents. The #1 cause of preventable death for young black men is homicide committed by other young black men. Coconut, as in brown on the outside, white on the inside. Oreo, same concept. The Antichrist.
Man, you got a whole list.
Because they've got to malign somebody like me. I am a bigger threat to their whole ideology than almost anybody else. A black guy who does not believe that he's a victim, a black guy who believes in hard work and personal responsibility. I've never heard Rush Limbaugh be called anti-white because he criticizes Hillary and the left. But I criticize black left people, and I'm anti-black. It's bigotry. It's racism.